Okay, we all know what ChatGPT is today, right? But the actual 5-year backstory of how it really came to be, it is an absolutely fascinating tale. It's the story of a massive, heavily doubted bet that basically flipped the entire technology world upside down.
1 million. You might have actually been one of them. That is the sheer number of users ChatGPT gained in just 5 days after it launched back on November 30th, 2022. It became the fastest growing consumer technology in human history. It completely blew past the early growth rates of giants like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. But to really grasp how we got to that explosive launch week, we need to jump back in time. So throughout this explainer, we're going to map out this journey chronologically. We'll start with the idea that started everything, see how they broke the sequential bottleneck, dive into their bet on massive scale, look at the moment the ground shifted, explain how they taught the model to behave, and finally, get to the day everything changed. All right, let's kick things off with part 1, the idea that started everything. Now, according to a brilliant deep dive essay in Tech Reader magazine by Aaron Rose, the story actually begins with a super dense 15-page research paper. And the crazy irony here, the origin story for ChatGPT starts with researchers at a rival company. 8 researchers at Google Brain published this paper on an open access server, and they gave it a wildly provocative title, Attention is All You Need.
Inside OpenAI, which was just a young San Francisco startup at the time, this paper landed like an absolute thunderbolt. Ilya Sutskever, OpenAI's chief scientist, read through this new transformer architecture they were proposing, and his reaction? As he later said in interviews, it was literally just, oh my god, this is the thing. He instantly recognized it as the missing puzzle piece for their holy grail vision of unsupervised learning. Basically, instead of humans painstakingly hand-labeling data, they could just let an AI teach itself by predicting the next word across mountains of raw text. Which brings us nicely to part 2, breaking the sequential bottleneck.
See, before this paper, the old way of doing AI relied on what are called recurrent neural networks, or RNNs, and they relied on sequential processing. Think of it like reading a sentence, one word at a time, strictly left to right. It was painfully slow, and it had incredibly fragile memory. By the time the AI got to the end of a long paragraph, it kind of forgot what happened at the beginning. But this new transformer architecture, it was a simultaneous processor. It could chew through entire texts all at once across thousands of modern chips. The real secret sauce making this possible is a mechanism called self-attention. By totally dropping that left-to-right reading style, self-attention let the machine look at the entire input at once. It could perfectly map out the relationships between words, no matter how far apart they were. So, for example, it instantly understood the difference between the word bank sitting next to river versus the word bank sitting next to money.
And that perfectly sets the stage for part 3, the bet on massive scale. So while the rest of the research community kind of thought making a model bigger would just hit a wall of diminishing returns, OpenAI made a massive contrarian bet. They truly believed that if they just scaled up this transformer on tons of raw text, magical things would happen. They started in 2018 with GPT-1. It had 117 million parameters. Think of parameters like the synaptic connections in a digital brain. Actually, by today's standards, that's pretty modest. But back then, it was absolutely vital because it proved the concept worked. An AI could perform tasks just by being asked, without needing any task-specific labels. Then, fast forward to 2019, and they just stomped on the gas. They jumped to 1.5 billion parameters with GPT-2. And suddenly, we saw the first warning signs of something incredible. The AI started exhibiting this spooky, emergent ability to write coherent, sustained prose. It could finish short stories or convincingly continue news articles. And remember, it wasn't programmed to write. That was purely an emergent property of scale. The AI was teaching itself. The sheer power of that bet leads us straight into part 4, when the ground shifted. Because in 2020, with the release of GPT-3, the parameter count exploded to an unbelievable 175 billion. We're talking more than 100 times larger than GPT-2. It was a staggering leap that completely shifted the ground right beneath the researchers' feet. At 175 billion parameters, this model was suddenly doing things it had literally never been explicitly trained to do. It was writing computer code, it was doing arithmetic, translating languages, and perfectly summarizing documents. Developers were just stumbling onto capabilities completely by accident. But as powerful and mind-bending as this raw intelligence was, it was still basically just a text completion engine. It had zero safety guardrails and no real sense of what a user actually wanted.
so it wasn't quite ready for the public.
Which meant they have a new problem to solve. Enter Part 5, teaching the model to behave. To turn this brilliant but frankly chaotic engine into the helpful assistant we use today, OpenAI basically had to give it a rigorous etiquette lesson. First up was something called instruction tuning. They had to teach the model to follow specific instructions instead of just endlessly predicting the next word. Rather than giving it a half-finished sentence to complete, they trained it on data phrased as direct commands like summarize this article, teaching it cooperative intent. And then came a painstakingly slow, expensive process called RLHF, reinforcement learning from human feedback. In step 1, actual human annotators sat down and literally reviewed and ranked the AI's outputs by quality. Then, in step 2, a totally separate reward model learned those exact human preferences. Finally, in step 3, the massive base model was fine-tuned to maximize that reward. It taught the AI what humans actually find helpful, accurate, and safe. That whole process is what transformed the raw AI into InstructGPT, the direct ancestor of ChatGPT. All right, finally we're at part 6, the day everything changed. Looking back at this timeline, it's pretty obvious that ChatGPT was absolutely not an overnight eureka moment. It was the climax of a highly uncertain 5-year gamble on scaling up that transformer architecture. It went from that 2017 paper through the steady, incremental steps of GPT-1, 2, and 3, all the way to finally laying a clean, conversational interface over the model in late 2022. Really, the biggest takeaway from this explainer is that the whole myth of the lone genius in a garage, it totally falls away here. This massive breakthrough happened because a team dared to keep building against the grain of expert opinion. They didn't invent the transformer, no, but they had the sheer conviction to scale it up when everyone else thought it was a total dead end. But, this incredible scale brings us to a pretty sobering final thought from our source material. This isn't just a fun technological leap. It's a race. And right now, our technology is advancing way faster than our ability to secure it. This massive bet on scale undeniably changed the world forever, but it leaves us all having to ask, what totally new, unpredictable capabilities are going to emerge when they scale it up again? Are we really ready for what comes next?